In this episode, we're going to focus on a topic that sounds narrow but is actually central to real-world security: how systems store passwords safely and verify them without exposing users to unnecessary risk. Beginners often assume the main password problem is what users choose. But even if users choose strong passwords, a system can still create massive danger if it stores those passwords incorrectly. If a password database is stolen and the passwords are stored in a reversible form, attackers can quickly turn that theft into account takeovers across many systems, because people reuse passwords. Secure password storage is about designing the system so that even if the password database is exposed, attackers still have a hard time turning it into usable passwords. That is where hashing, salting, and careful verification logic come in. You do not need to be a cryptography expert to understand this, but you do need a clear mental model of what the system is trying to achieve and what failure modes it must avoid. Start with the most important rule. A system should not store passwords in a form that allows them to be directly read back. If a system stores passwords in plain text, anyone who gains access to that storage can immediately see every user's password. That includes attackers, but it can also include insiders, backups, logs, or accidental exposure through misconfiguration. Even storing passwords with reversible encryption is risky if the decryption key is accessible to the system, because an attacker who compromises the system can often obtain the key or use the system itself to decrypt. The safer design is to store a derived value that cannot feasibly be reversed back into the original password. That is what hashing is for. Hashing produces a fixed-size output from an input, and the key property here is that it is designed to be one-way, meaning you can compute the hash from the password, but you cannot practically compute the password from the hash. The system then verifies a login attempt by hashing the entered password and comparing it to the stored hash. Hashing, however, is not the whole story, because attackers do not need to reverse a hash if they can guess the password and hash their guesses until they find a match. This is the core attack against password hashes: offline guessing. If an attacker steals the password hash database, they can perform guessing on their own machines without interacting with the live system, which means rate limits and lockouts no longer protect you. They can try millions or billions of guesses depending on resources. That is why password hashing must be designed to make guessing expensive. If the hashing process is very fast, attackers can try huge numbers of guesses quickly. If the hashing process is intentionally slow and resource-intensive, guessing becomes much harder and more costly. The goal is to increase the work required per guess so that even with stolen hashes, many passwords remain safe because cracking them becomes impractical or takes too long to be useful. Now let's introduce salting, because salting is one of the most important concepts beginners must understand to see why basic hashing alone can still be dangerous. A salt is a unique, random value that is combined with a password before hashing. The key idea is that each user should have a different salt, even if two users happen to choose the same password. Without salts, identical passwords produce identical hashes, which means an attacker can see which users share passwords and can reuse precomputed attack tables. With salts, the same password produces different hashes for different users because the salt changes the input to the hash. This defeats many precomputed attacks and forces the attacker to crack each user's password separately, which increases effort dramatically. Salting also prevents a common pattern where attackers recognize a known hash value for a common password. When each user's salt is unique, there is no universal hash for a given password, which is exactly what you want. It's important to be clear about what salt does and what it does not do, because beginners sometimes think salt is a secret, like a key, but that is not the main point. The salt does not need to be hidden to be effective. It is typically stored alongside the hash, because the system needs it to verify passwords. The security value comes from uniqueness and randomness, not secrecy. The salt makes the attacker's job harder by eliminating the ability to use one crack result across many users and by preventing cheap precomputation. Even if the attacker knows the salt, they still must perform the hashing work for each guess and for each user. That is why salts must be generated properly. If salts are predictable or reused, the benefits shrink. Think of the salt as a way to personalize the hashing for each account, turning a single password cracking effort into many separate efforts. Now let's talk about safe verification logic, because even when hashing and salting are done correctly, the login process can still leak information or fail in ways that attackers exploit. Verification logic should be designed to avoid telling an attacker too much. For example, error messages that reveal whether a username exists can help attackers enumerate valid accounts. A safer approach is to use consistent messaging so attackers do not get free confirmation. Another issue is timing differences, where the system responds slightly faster for certain cases, which can leak information about partial matches. While these timing issues can be subtle, the general principle for beginners is that authentication should not leak information through side channels. Verification should treat failures consistently. Another aspect of safe logic is rate limiting and lockout behavior for online guessing, which still matters even though offline attacks are the bigger risk after a breach. The system should slow down repeated failures in a way that reduces guessing while avoiding easy denial of service abuse. It also matters how passwords move through the system during verification. Even if you store hashes correctly, you can still compromise passwords if they appear in logs, crash dumps, or debugging output. A secure design avoids writing passwords to logs and minimizes where the raw password is stored in memory. While beginners do not need to write code to understand this, the principle is that sensitive secrets should have minimal exposure. The verification process should accept the password input, compute the hash with the correct salt and algorithm, compare with the stored hash, and then discard the raw password as quickly as possible. Another key point is that password reset and change workflows must be handled carefully because they are moments when new secrets are created and old secrets are invalidated. If those workflows leak information or allow weak verification, they can undermine the whole authentication system. A crucial beginner concept is that not all hashes are equally appropriate for passwords, and the reason is performance. In many systems, hashing algorithms are designed to be fast because they are used for integrity checks, not for password storage. Fast hashing is good when you want to quickly verify that data has not changed, but it is bad for password storage because attackers can guess too quickly. Password hashing should be slow by design, often including a work factor that can be increased as hardware gets faster. The system should also be designed to allow upgrading the hashing approach over time, because what is considered strong today may be weaker in the future as attackers gain faster hardware and better cracking techniques. Beginners do not need to memorize specific algorithm names to understand the principle. Use password-specific hashing designs that are intentionally expensive and configurable and plan for evolution. The big risk is using a generic fast hash and assuming that because it is one way, it is automatically safe. Salting and slow hashing work together. But there is also an idea called peppering that beginners sometimes hear about, and it can be helpful to understand it at a high level without getting lost. A pepper is an additional secret value that is combined with the password before hashing, similar to a salt. But unlike a salt, the pepper is intended to be kept secret and shared across many accounts. The goal is to add a secret that attackers cannot obtain if they only steal the hash database. If the pepper is stored separately, such as in a protected configuration system, it can add an extra barrier. However, peppering is not a replacement for salting or slow hashing, because if an attacker compromises the system itself, they may obtain the pepper as well. So peppering can add value in certain threat models, but it should be seen as an extra layer, not the core defense. The core remains unique salts and strong, slow password hashing that remains effective even when the database is stolen. Another important piece of safe password storage is handling legacy systems and migrations, because in the real world, systems evolve and old storage methods may be weak. A common pattern is that a system initially stored passwords insecurely, then later upgrades to a stronger method. The migration challenge is that you cannot directly convert a stored hash into a new hash without knowing the original password. A practical approach is to upgrade the stored password representation when the user logs in successfully, because at that moment the system sees the raw password and can compute the new stronger hash and salt. Over time, more accounts become upgraded as users log in. This kind of upgrade path is important because it reduces the window where weak storage persists. It also highlights a beginner lesson. Security is not only about ideal design, it is also about managing transitions safely. When you see exam scenarios about legacy systems, You should think about staged upgrades and risk reduction rather than sudden, unrealistic overhauls. Finally, it's helpful to connect secure password storage to the larger authentication ecosystem, because password storage is only one part of the story. Strong password storage reduces the damage of a password database breach, but it does not prevent phishing, malware, or credential reuse. That is why organizations also use MFA, monitor login behavior, and enforce good account hygiene. Still, secure storage is non-negotiable because it is one of the few areas where the system design can dramatically reduce harm even in worst-case scenarios. If you store passwords correctly, you transform a database theft from an immediate catastrophe into a slower, more limited risk. Attackers might still crack some weak passwords, but many accounts remain safe, and the organization has more time to respond, reset, and protect users. That time advantage is valuable. It turns a breach into a manageable incident rather than a cascading disaster. By the end of this episode, you should be able to explain why secure password storage requires hashing, why hashing must be paired with unique salts, and why the verification logic must be designed to avoid leaks and abuse. Hashing makes stored passwords non-reversible. Salting prevents precomputation and mass-cracking shortcuts. And slow, password-specific hashing makes guessing expensive even in offline attacks. Safe verification logic limits information leakage, reduces online guessing, and avoids exposing secrets through logs or error paths. When you think about password storage in terms of attacker capabilities and failure modes, you can answer exam questions more confidently, and you can also evaluate real systems more intelligently. This is one of those topics where a small design choice can determine whether a breach becomes a minor event or a major crisis, so it is worth internalizing deeply.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.